Welcome to your new home. You won't be leaving soon. Let's begin with the good news. You don't have to be insane to be committed to a Victorian asylum. The bad news? You're still getting committed. There are many ways to arrive here, most of them quiet. You don't remember screaming. Maybe you didn't. Maybe you just sat there, too stunned to protest as they folded your coat over your shoulders, gently, as if this were a favour, a kindness. 1 minute you were pacing your room, or weeping into your tea, or asking a few too many questions about your place in the world. The next, you were in a carriage, flanked by men who won't look you in the eye. They don't need you to be violent. They just need you to be vulnerable. If you're a woman, the bar for commitment is so low it might as well be underground. Did you speak too freely? Cry too long after childbirth? Refuse to marry? You're not willful. You're hysterical. If you're a man, maybe you drank too much, lost your job, talked to God in the street one time too many. If you're poor, it's easier still. Your mind is a luxury no one has time to protect. One confused outburst, one night without shelter, and congratulations. You're no longer society's concern. You're the asylum's. The legal process is simple. Someone, a husband, a brother, a father, a convenient neighbour, fills out a petition. A doctor, usually one who's never met you, signs a certificate stating you're of unsound mind. No second opinion needed, no defence allowed. That's it. You're not a citizen anymore. You're a patient now, or more accurately, a problem that's been politely relocated. The journey itself is unpleasant. You're told it's for your own good, though that doesn't explain why no one will say the word asylum aloud. They use euphemisms instead. Rest home, sanatorium, place of healing. You notice no one else seems relaxed. Your chaperones grip their hats like the wind might steal them. The driver doesn't speak, and the horse you swear knows exactly where you're going. Eventually the building appears. You expect something gothic, monstrous. Instead it's beautiful, stately, almost warm. Red brick towers, ivy on the walls, broad stone steps leading up to double doors. It looks more like a university than a prison. That illusion doesn't last. The moment the doors close behind you, everything changes. The warmth outside was architectural. Inside, the chill is institutional. Stone floors, iron bars, the smell of coal smoke and bleach, and something rotting slowly in the walls. No one offers you tea. No one tells you what's next. They take your name, your clothes, and your dignity in that order. The clothes they give you are thick and scratchy, like wearing someone else's skin. You're not permitted laces or belts. Too many accidents. If you're a woman, your hair might be cut short. If you're a man, your pockets are sewn shut. Personal items are confiscated. Books, jewellery, photographs, all gone. You are now, officially, just another ward of the asylum. A body to manage. A record in a ledger. They walk you to the admissions ward. It's a long corridor, lined with iron radiators that don't seem to radiate much of anything. The windows are high and narrow, like slits in a castle wall. The light that filters through is pale and dust-choked, making everything look like it's been underwater for a very long time. You pass other patients along the way. Some stare, some mutter, some don't move at all. One woman stands rigid by the wall, whispering to her own fingers. A man nearby hums tunelessly, his face smeared with something that might once have been food or blood. You're told not to worry. They're in different stages of recovery. You're not sure what that means, but you know you'll be joining them soon. Once admitted, you're examined, not gently. A doctor, always male, always tired, inspects your eyes, your teeth, your hands. He may ask a few questions, but he doesn't seem to care about the answers. He writes something down in a heavy book and nods to the orderly. That's it. Your identity, your history, your side of the story, irrelevant. What matters now is your behaviour. or rather, your ability to mimic the kind of behaviour that won't get you restrained. Because here's the truth. Once inside, every action you take is evidence. If you cry, you're unstable. If you protest, you're violent. If you smile too much, you're delusional. If you're quiet, you're depressed. The walls don't just contain you, they define you. You will be diagnosed retroactively, based on how well you play the role they've already assigned you. Some patients go quietly, almost gratefully. They're exhausted. Life outside was too loud, too cruel, too full of sharp edges. The asylum, for all its horrors, is at least predictable. 3 meals, a bed, a place to disappear. Others fight. They scream, kick, beg for someone, anyone, to listen. That ends the same way every time, with restraints, with sedation, with a note in the file that says combative. The kind of note that ensures you'll be staying here for a very long time. Eventually, you're led to your ward, a long hall, identical doors, metal numbers. The room is small, cot, chamber pot, thin blanket. There is no lock on the inside of the door. There doesn't need to be. You're not getting out without help, and help is not coming. You sit on the bed and stare at the wall. You think about the people who brought you here, whether they'll visit, whether they meant it when they said they'd write. You think about the last time someone asked how you were feeling and actually cared about the answer. You wait for someone to explain what happens next. They don't. Eventually, you stop asking, because here in the asylum you learn quickly. The more you ask, the more broken they think you are. And broken things don't leave. Now that you've arrived, let's talk about why you're here, or rather, why the doctors say you're here. Because when it comes to diagnosing mental illness in the Victorian era, the science is elastic, less objective medicine, more spinning a wheel and seeing what kind of crazy sticks. What matters is not what's actually wrong with you, but what someone else has decided counts as wrong in the first place. If you're a woman, the most common diagnosis is hysteria. Not because you're hysterical in any modern sense of the word, but because you had the misfortune of being born with a uterus. The theory goes like this. Your womb is unhappy, and instead of expressing this disappointment like a normal organ, say through pain or bleeding, it decides to wander around your body, disrupting everything in its path. Your lungs, your liver, even your brain. If that sounds made up, that's because it is. But this imaginary uterus migration, hysteria, from the Greek hystera, meaning womb, is still the go-to explanation for anything from mood swings, to migraines, to, heaven forbid, independent thought. Symptoms include nervousness, insomnia, shortness of breath, fainting, irritability, excessive talking, not talking enough, being too interested in sex, not being interested in sex at all, and, most critically, disagreeing with your husband. Treatment usually involves some form of sedation, isolation, or, if you're lucky, being told to lie in bed for weeks, while strangers monitor your every sigh. The more enthusiastic practitioners may suggest a pelvic massage to induce hysterical paroxysm. That's Victorian medical slang for an orgasm, by the way. Your doctor might be alarmingly eager to administer this himself. You should not be. If you're a man, your odds of being diagnosed with hysteria are lower. But don't worry, there are other labels ready to ruin your life. You might be declared melancholic, which is a polite way of saying you're sad in a way that makes other people uncomfortable. Maybe you lost your job, or your wife died, or you drink too much because the factory you work in is slowly killing you, and the air tastes like coal. None of that matters. What matters is that you've stopped functioning the way society demands. You're not productive, you're not cheerful, and worst of all, you're not pretending anymore. That makes you a liability. Melancholia is a broad diagnosis. It can mean depression, anxiety, grief, guilt, or just being a bit slow in the mornings. Victorian doctors classify it as a spiritual and physical ailment, a weakness of character and of the body. Treatment involves cold baths, forced labour, and being told to cheer up by men with moustaches who haven't smiled since the Crimean War. If your melancholia comes with religious guilt or delusions, they might pray over you. If it comes with suicidal thoughts, they might just lock you in a room with barred windows and hope the feeling passes. Spoiler, it usually doesn't. Then there's the most feared diagnosis of all: masturbation. Yes, you heard that correctly. Masturbation isn't just frowned upon in Victorian medicine. It's treated as a literal disease, a degenerative, brain-melting, soul-corrupting illness that can only end in madness and death. The prevailing theory is that self-pleasure drains your body of vital fluids, disrupts the nervous system, and causes everything from memory loss to curvature of the spine. Symptoms include laziness, acne, excessive daydreaming, a fondness for solitude, and any mention of trousers after 9 p.m. Doctors genuinely believed that masturbation was the gateway to insanity. Entire asylum wings were filled with people accused of being self-abusers. Treatments were creative in the worst possible way: metal cages to prevent access, ice baths to shock you out of temptation, electric shocks to the genitals, surgical intervention if you seemed especially persistent. Yes, that means circumcision without anaesthetic, or in more severe cases, clitoridectomy. Because nothing says mental health like medical assault. Of course, most of the people diagnosed with this weren't chronic masturbators. They were lonely, isolated, teenagers caught in a moment of privacy, widows, invalids, sometimes just people who asked for too much privacy or avoided eye contact. The logic was circular. You're showing signs of degeneration, and since we've decided masturbation causes degeneration, you must be guilty. It's not about what you've done, it's about what your body suggests you might be capable of. Other diagnoses round out the field: moral insanity for people who seem too cheerful while being poor, religious mania for people who pray too often, monomania for anyone obsessed with a single topic, puerperal insanity if your postpartum depression lasts more than a few days. And then there's idiocy and imbecility, both medical terms in this era, used to describe everything from congenital disabilities to poor academic performance. The categories are blurry, the labels are sticky. Once assigned, they rarely get removed. And let's not forget the convenient catch-all: mania. If you're agitated, aggressive, or simply too loud, you're manic. If you try to escape, you're violent. If you speak too fast, you're delusional. These aren't symptoms, they're excuses. Once a diagnosis is written in the ledger, every twitch you make is interpreted through it. You're no longer a person with a story. You're a condition on legs. There is no appeals process, no opportunity for clarification. If you try to explain yourself, that's considered a symptom. If you weep, you're unstable. If you say nothing, you're catatonic. If you laugh at the absurdity of it all, you're showing signs of inappropriate emotional affect. And that, of course, is a reason to keep you longer. Diagnosis is not the beginning of treatment. It's the beginning of containment. And remember, this is all taking place under the gaze of Victorian respectability, an era obsessed with surface and order, where madness isn't seen as a sickness to be understood, but a stain to be scrubbed out. The asylum doesn't aim to help you heal, it aims to render you quiet. And if that silence is achieved through sedation, starvation, humiliation, or invasive corrections, well, that's just the cost of decency. By now you might be wondering how many of these so-called diagnoses would apply to people today. The answer is nearly all of them. Anxiety, depression, gender non-conformity, ADHD, homosexuality, grief. In the Victorian asylum system, all of that is cause for alarm. In fact, the more you think, the more you feel, the more you question. the more likely you are to be labelled insane. And once that label is applied, it becomes the lens through which everyone views you. You are no longer Alice, who lost her child. You are no longer Thomas, who saw too much in the war. You are not someone who is hurting. You are someone who is mad. And in the eyes of the system, that difference is everything. From the outside, it doesn't look so bad. The asylum rises out of the countryside like some stately university or country estate, a vision in red brick and symmetry. Ivy clings to the walls. The lawns are freshly cut. There's even a fountain, though it hasn't worked in years. You might think for a moment that this is a place of peace, that you'll be given time to rest, maybe read a book, sit by a window and reflect. But then the gates close behind you, and the peace begins to feel less like comfort and more like containment. The asylum is large, unnecessarily so, the kind of large that makes you feel smaller with every step. It follows something called the Kirkbride Plan, a grand theory in which the building itself is part of the cure. You're supposed to heal just by being in it, breathing the clean air, walking the long halls, basking in the symmetry of your own confinement. It sounds almost pleasant until you realise what it really means. You've entered a maze designed by people who think your brain can be fixed with fresh air and silence. The further you are from the front entrance, the more dangerous they consider you. The furthest wing is reserved for the hopeless. You don't know where they've placed you yet, but the hallway seems longer than you'd like. You walk beneath high ceilings and past endless doors, each one identical, each one numbered. There are no names. Names imply individuality. You gave that up at the intake desk. The walls are painted in lifeless colours, beige, grey, olive, colours that suggest calm but deliver apathy. The floors are stone or wood, always cold, always echoing. You can't sneak anywhere in here. Every step announces itself. Your room, if you can call it that, is spare. An iron-framed bed with a thin mattress, a chamber pot, a small table with nothing on it. The window is narrow and barred, positioned high enough that you can't see out of it unless you stand on the bed. You try this once. The view is a brick wall. It feels intentional. Even the furniture is suspicious. Everything is bolted down or designed to break you slowly. Stiff chairs with straight backs. Tables that offer no comfort. There's no softness here. No personal touches. You might as well be living inside a storage closet designed by someone who's never had a single feeling in their life. The corridors are long, straight, and disorienting. You begin to lose your sense of direction almost immediately. Left becomes right. Time becomes abstract. You pass the same rusted radiator 5 times in a day and start to wonder if you're walking in circles. But no, the building just repeats itself, over and over, like it's trying to erase you. You hear everything. There's no such thing as privacy in the asylum. Footsteps echo from hallways you can't see. Whispers bounce off the walls and reach you hours after they were spoken. At night, the building groans, from the pipes or the walls or maybe the people. You stop asking where sounds come from. Most of them have no origin. Some of them, you suspect, aren't sounds at all. During the day, the windows filter in light that's weak and directionless. It doesn't feel like real sunlight. It feels like the idea of sunlight, if someone described it to a committee that had never been outdoors. At night there's gas lighting or lanterns, but the glow is inconsistent. Sometimes you're left in near darkness. Other times, they keep the lights on, claiming it prevents self-harm. Mostly, it just keeps you awake. Outside, there are gardens. You're allowed to walk them if you behave. The paths are gravel, raked obsessively. The hedges are trimmed into shapes you can't quite identify. Flowers, if present, are always modest. There's no colour here that might inspire joy. The trees are carefully spaced, not for shade, but for surveillance. You can feel the eyes on you, even when you're alone. Especially then. There are rules and they're unwritten. Walk too quickly and you're agitated, Walk too slowly and you're sullen. Look someone in the eye for too long and you're confrontational. Avoid eye contact and you're withdrawn. The building doesn't correct you. It just watches and then it records. Somewhere an orderly jots down a note about your posture and you've just earned another week in observation. The bathrooms are communal. The word dignity does not apply. You share everything. Benches with holes, cold wash basins, the occasional tin tub dragged out on bathing days. The water is always too cold. The soap is optional. Privacy is non-existent. Cleanliness is theoretical. On bad days, the smell in the halls is enough to make you forget what fresh air feels like. Sound is a weapon here. The building carries it, distorts it, feeds it back to you like a twisted lullaby. You'll hear someone crying 2 wards over and think they're in your room. You'll hear your own thoughts too loudly and mistake them for someone else's. Screams become routine. Laughter doesn't mean what it used to. Silence, when it comes, is worse. If you're lucky, you'll be assigned to a wing with a chapel. A Gothic thing, all dark wood and stained glass depictions of suffering. You're encouraged to pray, not to heal, just to repent. Madness is still seen as a moral failing. Your sin might have been pride or sloth, or simply the inability to smile on command. In this building, God watches too, or so they say. You begin to sense the structure's intent. This place wasn't designed to help you find yourself. It was designed to make you forget that you ever had a self. The sameness, the echo, the blank spaces where joy should live. It all serves a purpose. You are being erased gently with architecture. Visitors, if they come at all, will remark on how impressive the building is, how clean it looks, how safe it seems. They'll comment on the high ceilings, the pleasant grounds, the way everything feels so orderly. They won't hear the woman in the next ward who hasn't spoken in weeks. They won't see the man who stares at the wall and no longer blinks. They'll leave thinking you're in good hands. You'll watch them go through a window too small to open, and you'll wonder if they saw you wave. The asylum is beautiful, in the way a sealed tomb is beautiful. It's symmetrical, stately, permanent. You, on the other hand, are none of those things. You're a patient, a temporary disruption, and this place is very, very good at outlasting disruptions. You wake up to the sound of keys, not an alarm, not a gentle knock. Keys jangling just outside your door, accompanied by footsteps that always stop too close. The orderly doesn't say good morning. He doesn't say anything. He opens the door just wide enough to remind you that you're not in control of it. Then he walks away, expecting you to follow. This is how your day begins. Not with light or warmth, but with permission to exist outside your cell. The hallway is the same as it was yesterday, and the day before that. Long, pale, smelling faintly of bleach, coal dust, and something less specific, the odour of too many people surviving in close quarters for far too long. You move in line with the others, shuffling down the corridor toward the dining hall. No one speaks. Speaking is a privilege, and privileges are easily revoked. So you keep your head down and watch the floor for cracks you've memorised by now. Breakfast is served in a long, echoing room with wooden benches and walls that absorb nothing. The food is, technically, food, if you're being generous. Usually, it's cold porridge, served in chipped bowls, no sugar, no fruit, no texture beyond soggy. Sometimes there's bread, hard as stone, and always a little stale. If you're lucky, you get weak tea. If not, lukewarm water. You eat in silence, surrounded by dozens of others doing the same. Some stare at nothing, others tremble, hands barely managing to lift the spoon. The staff patrol the room, watching for spills, for disobedience, for any twitch that could be misinterpreted as madness. After breakfast, you return to the ward, or if you're part of the work programme, you're escorted elsewhere. The asylum runs on unpaid labour, and you're now part of its machinery. You may be assigned to laundry, scrubbing endless sheets stained with things no one discusses, or kitchen duty, peeling potatoes until your hands blister. If you're especially trusted, and that's a dangerous kind of attention, you might be allowed to work in the gardens, raking gravel, pulling weeds, always under supervision. Work is considered therapeutic. Productive hands, they say, lead to quiet minds. But the real purpose is control. When your muscles are sore and your body is drained, you're less likely to resist, less likely to think. The asylum doesn't want you lively. It wants you manageable. If you're not working, your options are limited. You walk the corridors, slowly, deliberately, because any sudden movement invites suspicion. You sit in the day room, if it's open, with its hard chairs and complete absence of comfort. You stare out the window, though the view is the same. Brick wall, sky, a flicker of green in the distance that never gets closer. Sometimes you watch the other patients. One rocks back and forth. One mutters into her sleeve. One hasn't moved in hours. You don't talk to them. You don't talk to anyone, really. Talking draws attention, and attention is rarely good. Lunch comes at noon, and it's slightly warmer than breakfast. Boiled vegetables, overcooked to the point of collapse. A stew, thin and greasy, made from meat of uncertain origin. You eat it because you're hungry, but not because you enjoy it. Enjoyment is not part of the routine. After the meal, the silence continues. There is no music, no reading aloud, no stimulation of any kind. The doctors believe too much activity agitates the mind. Better to keep things dull, predictable. Number. The afternoon is more of the same. If it's Tuesday or Thursday, you may have group prayer. If it's Wednesday, a visiting physician might prod you with questions and then write something in your file without looking at your face. If it's raining, which it often is, you stay inside. If it's sunny, you might be herded out into the yard, where you walk in circles until someone rings a bell and brings you back inside. You don't choose what you do, you don't choose when you do it. Choice is not part of your treatment plan. The rest of your day is spent pacing, not because you want to, because there's nothing else to do. You walk up and down the hallway, count the steps between doors, trace the cracks in the walls. You watch the same spider spin the same web in the same corner, and for a moment you envy it. At least it has a purpose, at least it built something. Dinner is early, boiled cabbage, bread. Occasionally, if there's a celebration somewhere you weren't invited to, you might get a scrap of cheese. Afterward, you return to your room. The bed is still hard. The blanket is still thin. You climb beneath it without undressing. There's no real reason to, and the air is cold enough to bite. You hear the key turn in your door, locking you in for the night. This is not for your safety, though that's how they'll explain it. It's for theirs. Nighttime in the asylum is louder than you expect. People talk to themselves, cry out, scream. You hear someone down the hall kicking the wall. Someone else is sobbing, muffled by a pillow. You lie still and stare at the ceiling, trying to remember the shape of a quiet room. The silence before all this. The way your own name used to sound when spoken kindly. You try to sleep, but sleep doesn't come easily. The mattress sags in the middle. The blanket scratches your skin. Your body aches from the labour, but your mind refuses to shut down. It loops over the same questions again and again. How long have you been here? How much longer will they keep you? What exactly did you do to deserve this? Eventually, exhaustion wins, but rest is a loose term. You wake often, sweating, heart pounding, unsure whether the scream you heard was real or just a memory. In the morning it starts again. The keys, the corridor, the cold porridge, the silence. This is the routine. It doesn't change. It's not supposed to. The goal is not to help you feel better. The goal is to break you down until you fit the mold they've carved out for you, until your madness is quiet enough to ignore, or your sanity is quiet enough to doubt. And so you walk, and you work, and you wait, for release, for redemption, for someone to realize that you are never sick, just overwhelmed. But no one comes, the doors stay closed, the clock keeps ticking, and the routine continues, not because it heals you, but because it's easier to manage a schedule than a soul. When you were admitted, someone probably used the word therapy. They may have even said it with a straight face. They told you this was a place for healing, that treatment would be administered regularly, with care by professionals. You might have imagined conversation, kindness, maybe even a doctor who listened. But what you actually get is an assortment of procedures that feel more like punishments with Latin names. The goal here isn't to make you well. The goal is to make you easier to manage. Your first therapy might be the restraint chair. It's exactly what it sounds like. A tall wooden throne with leather straps across the arms, legs, chest, and sometimes even your forehead. The idea is to calm you, to help you focus, to stop you from hurting yourself or others. In reality, it's used when you've spoken too loudly, asked too many questions, or simply refused your food with the wrong expression on your face. They strap you in and leave you there, sometimes for hours, sometimes longer. You don't move because you can't. You don't scream because you're too tired. Eventually, you learn to stop resisting, not because you feel better, but because you know what happens if you don't. If you're especially fortunate, the next stop on your wellness tour might involve leeches. Yes, actual leeches. This is part of a centuries-old belief that madness is caused by bad blood, too much of it. The solution? Remove some. Out comes the lancet or the leech jar. A nurse, or sometimes just an orderly, with questionable hygiene, will press the slimy creature to your skin and wait for it to latch on. You'll watch, feeling faint, as it fills with your blood. When it's done, they toss it aside and call the treatment a success. You, meanwhile, are a pint lighter and no closer to clarity. Then there are the enemas. These aren't rare, they're regular, scheduled. Asylums are obsessed with digestion, convinced that a clogged colon is the root of all mental illness. If you're agitated, it's probably your bowels. If you're depressed, your intestines must be sluggish. The solution? Irrigation. Performed with cold water and a disturbingly cheerful attitude. No warning, no consent. Just a nurse with a rubber tube and a supervisor scribbling in a notebook. You're told it will rebalance your system. What it actually does is rob you of any remaining sense of bodily autonomy. Hydrotherapy is also popular. In theory, water soothes the soul. In practice, it's just another way to make you compliant. You might be submerged in a bath for hours, sometimes days, with only your head above water. The temperature is tepid, the room is drafty, and you're not allowed to speak. You lie still, your limbs going numb, while a nurse checks periodically to make sure you haven't drowned. This is considered progress. If you complain, they assume you need more time in the water. If you fall asleep, they say the treatment is working. There's no way to win, only ways to survive it more quietly. On more energetic days, you may be subjected to cold, wet sheet packs. They wrap you tightly, mummy style, in icy linen soaked in freezing water, then leave you on a table to cool the brain. You can't move, you can barely breathe. You lie there for what feels like hours, shivering and staring at the ceiling, while your mind races with thoughts they'll never believe you had. This is supposed to reduce agitation. It does, mostly by freezing the will out of you. Electricity also makes an appearance, not the kind used in modern medicine. No, this is far less precise. Electrotherapy in the Victorian era is experimental at best and sadistic at worst. Crank-operated devices are wheeled in, and currents are applied to your scalp, spine, or, if someone's feeling especially imaginative, your genitals. No anesthesia, no real science, just a vague hope that shocking the body will somehow reset the brain. If you convulse, they call it a sign of efficacy. If you vomit, they take notes. If you pass out, they say you're making progress. Blistering is another favoured method. A chemical paste is applied to your skin to raise welts, usually on the neck, spine, or chest. The goal? To draw out the illness through inflammation. The blister is then pierced and drained, sometimes repeatedly. You endure it in silence because screaming only gets you labelled uncooperative, and uncooperative patients are sent back to the restraint room, where the straps are already waiting. If you're a woman, you might also encounter uterine-specific treatments. The doctors believe that most of your problems originate in your reproductive organs, so they examine, manipulate, and occasionally operate on them with alarming frequency. Pessaries, vaginal douches, and internal examinations are routine. Consent is not. Modesty is irrelevant. The process is clinical and humiliating, and afterward, you are expected to thank them for their help. Psychological therapy, as you might imagine, is rare. If it happens at all, it's more interrogation than support. A doctor may ask how you're feeling, but only to confirm what he's already written in your file. If your answers deviate from the expected script, it's noted as a delusion. If you say too little, you're disengaged. If you say too much, you're obsessive. You are not expected to be understood, only categorized. And once categorized, corrected. You might ask yourself how any of this is supposed to help. You'll wonder why no one questions the logic of bleeding the weak, freezing the sad, or electrifying the confused. The answer is that it's not about healing. It's about order, control, efficiency. The asylum doesn't need you cured. It needs you quiet, manageable, and invisible. If a treatment shuts you up, slows you down, or drains your spirit, then it has succeeded by Victorian standards. There's a chart somewhere with your name on it, filled with notes like resistant to therapy or showing signs of compliance. These notes determine whether you get more of the same or something worse. You learn to play the part, to nod when expected, to mutter gratitude after being scolded, shocked, or violated. The staff call it progress. You call it survival. Eventually, even that begins to blur. None of these therapies are designed with your dignity in mind. They're not based on empathy or understanding. They're tools, crude, painful, and often medieval, used to scrape the inconvenient parts out of your psyche until only the manageable ones remain. And if they fail, well, there's always next week's enema. Eventually, someone tells you about moral treatment. They say it like it's a gift, a privilege, a turning point in your stay. You're no longer just a patient now. You're part of a grand experiment in kindness. You're being offered a chance to recover your reason, not through punishment, but through purpose. That sounds nice, doesn't it? Purpose. A break from the cold tubs and leeches. A chance to feel like a person again. But the truth is, moral treatment doesn't mean what you think it does. At least, not here. Not in this place. The idea began with good intentions. In theory, moral treatment was a revolutionary approach, but a rejection of cruelty and neglect in favour of structured routine, fresh air, and meaningful activity. No more chains, no more beatings, no more being tossed into a cell and forgotten. Instead, you'd be given healthy food, polite conversation, and wholesome tasks to occupy your time. It was, in its earliest form, a push toward dignity, but somewhere along the way, the dignity got lost. All that remained was the structure. And the structure, of course, included labour. So now, you're out in the garden, not because you asked to be, not because you like plants, but because someone with a clipboard has decided that pulling weeds is good for your soul. The sun is too bright, the ground is too hard, and your knees ache as you squat over rows of soil that haven't seen rain in weeks. You're handed a rake, a trowel, or maybe just your bare hands. You dig, you prune, you clear stones from paths that lead nowhere, and through it all, someone watches. Always. Therapy, you're told, must be supervised. They say that gardening reconnects you with nature, that it teaches patience, calm, and self-reliance. But you're not allowed to choose what you plant. You're not allowed to decide how the garden is arranged. You don't even get to keep what grows. The vegetables you harvest are taken to the kitchen. The flowers are picked for the administrator's office. You don't garden because it brings you peace. You garden because it keeps your hands busy. Because idle hands, they say, are the devil's workshop, and they'd rather see you blistered and sweating than sitting quietly with your thoughts. Other tasks fall under the umbrella of moral treatment as well. You may be assigned to laundry, to sewing, to polishing brass doorknobs that haven't been touched in years. Men tend the grounds or repair furniture. Women are often sent to the laundry rooms, where the steam never stops and the smell of soap clings to your skin long after you leave. You might be praised for your effort. You might even be told you're improving. But make no mistake, this is labour, not leisure. And it's not optional. You're not paid, of course not. You're a patient. Payment implies worth, autonomy. But the asylum depends on your labour. It runs on it. Without you and the others, there would be no food, no clean linens, no manicured hedges for the benefactors to admire. You are part of a machine now, one that calls itself compassionate while using your back to keep the wheels turning. On paper, moral treatment also includes conversation, gentle encouragement, the occasional board game, maybe a Bible reading. But in practice, these things are rare and carefully controlled. Most of your interactions are with staff who measure your behaviour more than they respond to it. If you speak too freely, they take notes. If you don't speak at all, they add that too. You're not having a conversation. You're being assessed. There might be a reading room, sparsely stocked with moral literature, sermons, biographies of dead men, pamphlets about self-restraint. Fiction is discouraged. Imagination is dangerous. Music, if allowed, is soft and pious. No one sings the songs you miss from your childhood. No one plays anything joyful. The point of moral treatment is not to lift your spirits. It's to shape them. You are expected to be orderly, obedient, and grateful. If you garden, it must be with reverence. If you speak, it must be with humility. You are not here to be yourself. You are here to become someone else's version of sane. The staff will smile when you bow your head and say, "Thank you," after another 12 hours of unpaid farm work. They'll note your progress. They'll praise your compliance, but none of that means you're getting better. It means you've stopped resisting. Occasionally, a visitor or inspector might tour the grounds and marvel at how industrious you all look. "What a fine idea," they'll say, watching you bend over the soil, hands raw, hair damp with sweat, to give them something useful to do. They don't see the way your shoulders slump when the bell rings. They don't see the blisters. They don't hear what happens after dinner, when you lie in bed, too exhausted to think, too numb to remember what it felt like to do something for your own joy. And when you do show signs of fatigue, when your pace slows or your grip weakens or your eyes wander too long toward the horizon, you're not asked what's wrong. You're disciplined. A sharper tone, a smaller portion at dinner, a note in the record. Patient uncooperative. Shows signs of idleness. You begin to understand that moral treatment is not about treating you morally. It's about making your behaviour more palatable, your spirit more subdued. If you ever dare to question it, if you ask why your therapy feels like punishment, why your hands are cracked and your spine aches and your mind feels no lighter, they'll remind you that it's for your own good. That structure heals. That routine builds character. That planting cabbages in silence is a vital step on the road to recovery. And if that doesn't work, they'll remind you what the alternatives are. You remember the restraint chair, the baths, the electricity. Suddenly gardening doesn't seem so bad. And so you go back to it. You dig, you prune, you weed, you rake the gravel paths that never lead anywhere. You pretend that moral treatment is working. even as your body tells a different story. You stop dreaming of freedom. You start dreaming of softer soil. Maybe, you think, if you dig deep enough, you'll find something buried, a key, a door, a version of yourself you forgot how to be. But all you find is more dirt. From the moment you arrive, you're told that the staff are here to help you, that they're trained, compassionate, professional. But it doesn't take long to see that most of them don't belong in a place like this, or perhaps they belong here a little too well. They are the gatekeepers of your day, your body, and in some cases, your sanity. And while some of them might be doing their best in impossible conditions, others seem to have left their empathy behind with their original career plans. Start with the attendants, the lowest tier of authority, and the ones you see most often. These are the men and women who oversee the day-to-day enforcement of the asylum's routine. They bring your food, escort you to the yard, stand silently in the corners of rooms, watching you like you're a jar about to fall off a shelf. Some are bored, some are bitter, many are simply exhausted. They're underpaid, undertrained, and overburdened. The turnover is high, and the patience is short. No one teaches them how to de-escalate a crisis. They're taught how to lock a door and how to write a report. Everything else, they learn on the job, and it shows. If you're lucky, you get assigned to a ward with a staff member who still remembers that you're human. They might sneak you an extra slice of bread. They might speak to you in a normal voice instead of a tone reserved for livestock. These people exist, but they're the exception, not the rule. Most days, your world is populated by people who seem either afraid of you or annoyed by your continued breathing. You learn quickly which ones can be spoken to, which ones you must avoid, and which ones are a coin toss depending on whether their breakfast was cold. Then there are the nurses, assuming your asylum has any. In theory, these are medically trained professionals tasked with your care. In practice, they're often hired with little or no medical background, then handed a syringe and told to keep the ward quiet. Some of them entered the profession with hope. They imagined healing, dignity, science. But over time, the endless noise, the underfunded halls, and the daily proximity to suffering erode something important. They become mechanical, routine, efficient. You are a chart, a dosage, a number, a pulse to monitor, not a voice to hear. They administer your treatments, the enemas, the cold baths, the restraints, without flinching. Not necessarily out of cruelty, often just out of detachment. After all, they've been told that these things are good for you, that it's better to restrain you than risk an outburst, that if you cry when they cut your hair or flinch when they tighten the straps, it's proof the treatment is working. And if they have doubts, they keep them quiet. Doubt is expensive. Compassion gets you reprimanded. Above them stand the doctors, men with waistcoats, pocket watches, and a deep conviction that they understand the human mind better than you ever will. Most of them have never spent a day inside a patient's head. Their degrees are real, usually, but the science is not. Psychology is still in its infancy. Psychiatry is guesswork dressed in Latin. They talk about cases, not people. They walk the halls with clipboards and the occasional air of distant amusement, noting your behaviours as if observing an interesting but ultimately unimportant animal. Your interaction with them is limited. A few minutes a week, perhaps, during which you're asked to describe your dreams, rate your mood, or answer questions designed less to help you and more to confirm their existing diagnosis. If you say you feel better, they ask whether you're delusional. If you admit you feel worse, they double your dosage. Every word you say is held up to the harsh light of assumption. And should you ever question their authority, even gently, it's marked down as non-compliance. There are specialists too, or at least people who claim to be. A phrenologist might measure the bumps on your skull to determine your moral weaknesses. A mesmerist might try to hypnotize the madness out of you. These fringe practitioners are welcomed, oddly enough, because the real doctors are desperate for anything that might produce results. The line between science and superstition is thin, and the patients are the test subjects. At the top of it all is the superintendent, the man who runs the asylum. You'll probably never meet him, but he affects everything you do. He controls the budget, the staffing, the rules. He answers to no one but the board, and the board only cares about efficiency and appearances. If the hallways are quiet and the books are balanced, they assume everything is fine. Whether you're improving or slowly unravelling is not part of the report. Of course, there are those among the staff who enjoy their work a little too much. They like the power, the silence that follows their footsteps, the way you flinch when they raise their voice. These are the ones who make rules just to watch you try to follow them, who tighten the straps an extra notch, who lean in close when they speak, not to comfort you, but to remind you that they can. If you try to report them, you won't be believed. The system protects its own. You're the patient. They're the staff. Case closed. And then there are the ones who do nothing, who watch cruelty happen and stay silent, who witness injustice and look away, not because they're evil, just because they've learned that speaking up changes nothing. They've made peace with the system in the same way you're expected to, by becoming numb. And numbness spreads. One day, someone forgets your name. The next, someone forgets to feed you. Eventually, you forget how to ask. The staff may not be monsters, but they are not your allies. They are overworked, undertrained, caught in a system that demands control above compassion. Some are broken, some are brutal, most are just tired. And in the end, it doesn't matter why they do what they do. It only matters that you're the one locked in the room while they hold the key. You're not alone in the asylum. That fact hits you early. In the hallway, in the ward, in the dining room, in the muffled noises that seep through the walls at night. There are dozens, sometimes hundreds, of other patients housed here alongside you, each one carrying their own version of suffering. Some arrived weeks ago. Some have been here so long they no longer speak in full sentences. Some don't speak at all. You learn quickly that the people around you are not what you expected. They are not all dangerous. They are not all broken, but they are all trapped, just like you. There's no real separation by diagnosis. The categories are loose, and the space is limited. So you might sleep next to a man who believes he's the king of France, eat breakfast across from a woman who hasn't blinked in an hour, and be followed down the corridor by someone whispering prayers to the ceiling. The ward becomes a strange little world of disconnected realities, overlapping in strange, unpredictable ways. You walk through it carefully, like wading through deep water, trying not to disturb anything you don't understand. Some patients are loud, unapologetically so. They cry out, moan, hum, curse. Their voices bounce off the walls and follow you wherever you go. Sometimes they repeat the same word or phrase for hours. Sometimes they scream names of children, of saints, of people who might not exist. You grow used to it, but not comfortable. The human brain isn't designed to ignore that kind of noise forever. It starts to work its way into your dreams, into your thoughts, until you're not sure which cries were real and which were yours. Others are silent, more unsettling in a way. They sit in corners, stand by windows, lie in beds and stare at ceilings as if trying to will themselves invisible. You pass them in the hallway and they don't flinch. They don't even blink. Some rock back and forth, their motions slow and rhythmic, like waves on a dead sea. Others press their fingers to their lips or ears or eyes in quiet ritual. They are here with you, but not with you. Whatever part of them once looked outward has long since turned in. You start to recognise a few familiar faces, not friends exactly. The asylum doesn't encourage friendship, but fixtures. There's the woman who mutters nursery rhymes under her breath as she sweeps. The man who always asks the same question, is it Sunday? no matter the day. The younger girl who flinches every time someone moves too quickly. You learn their patterns, their silences, the things that set them off. You learn how to avoid them and how to avoid becoming them. Violence does happen, but it's rarely the out-of-nowhere chaos you feared when you first arrived. It builds, slowly. You see it in a clenched jaw, a tightening of shoulders, a hand that begins to tremble before it lashes out. And when it does erupt, it's not always the one you expect. Sometimes it's the quiet ones. Sometimes it's someone who just can't take the smell anymore, or the noise, or the weight of another day that looks exactly like the last. The orderlies are quick to intervene, with straps, with sedatives, with force. You watch and you learn what not to do. Then there are the ones you can't make sense of at all, the ones who laugh at nothing, who talk to people who aren't there, who seem possessed by something so deep and inward that no outside force could reach them. You feel pity sometimes, fear other times, but mostly you feel a kind of grief, because you don't know how close you are to becoming one of them. You don't know if you already are. You hear stories, whispers traded between beds or passed quietly in the yard. That one woman used to be a pianist. That man was a professor. Someone else worked in a bakery, had a family, spoke 4 languages. Some of the stories are probably true, some aren't, but it doesn't matter. The past isn't relevant in here. You're no longer defined by what you were. You're defined by how still you can sit, how quiet you can stay, how well you perform your assigned identity. There's no privacy, not really. You sleep with other people, eat with other people, bathe when you're allowed to, within earshot of other people. When someone has an episode, everyone hears it. When someone dies, everyone feels the absence. It's a shared experience of isolation, paradoxical as that sounds. You're together, but never connected. The staff discourage attachments. Too distracting, too risky. You're expected to coexist without forming bonds. And yet, small gestures happen. A hand steadied on a shoulder. A crust of bread left under a blanket. A whispered thank you in the middle of the night. These aren't acts of rebellion, but reminders that you're still people. That beneath the diagnoses and the rules and the daily humiliations, something human remains. But it's fragile, and you don't know how long it will last. Over time, you begin to see patterns. Some patients improve, not because they're getting better, but because they're getting better at pretending. They've learned what the staff want to see: steady hands, downcast eyes, clean clothes, folded just right. They learn to say the right words at the right time, not because they believe them, but because they know it buys them peace. You think about trying it yourself. You probably will. Others deteriorate, the noise gets louder, the rocking gets faster, the gaps in memory get wider. Some stop eating, some stop speaking. Some are taken to the quiet ward and never come back. You wonder if they're dead. You wonder if that would be better. You tell yourself you're not like them, that you're still sane, that your thoughts still make sense, but as the days pass and the weeks blur, and the same cries echo off the same walls, your certainty begins to slip. You start to talk to yourself, just a little. You start to forget things, just for a moment. You start to stare a second too long, and when someone else does the same, you look away, because you don't want to see your reflection in their vacant eyes. This is your community now, a chaotic symphony of screams and sobs and silence. No one asked to be here. No one came by choice, but you're here all the same, sharing space, sharing pain, waiting for someone to open the door and let you out, even though you're not sure you'd recognize freedom anymore if it walked up and took your hand. If you're a woman in a Victorian asylum, your path here was probably shorter than a man's, and your chances of leaving are lower. That's not just a cruel twist of fate. It's baked into the system, designed and maintained by men who decided what counted as illness and what counted as femininity. Often, they were the same thing. Your gender wasn't just part of your identity, it was your diagnosis. You could be committed for too much emotion, for not enough, for crying too long after the death of a child, or for not crying at all. You could be locked away for speaking your mind, for reading the wrong books, for refusing to marry, or for asking too many questions. You could find yourself in a straitjacket, not because you were violent, but because you refused to stop talking when told. Anything that made you inconvenient, to your husband, to your family, to society, could be interpreted as madness. Once you're inside, everything becomes about your body. Your mind, your story, your pain, all are filtered through the lens of biology. The doctors speak of your womb as if it were an animal they're trying to cage. They believe it moves around, interferes with your lungs, your heart, your thoughts. They blame your mood swings on your ovaries, your anxiety on your cycle, your grief on your uterus being out of place. It sounds ridiculous, but it's treated as medical fact. You're not unwell, you're just a woman, and that's considered pathological. The therapies reflect this belief. You're more likely to be subjected to female-specific treatments, many of which are invasive, humiliating, and performed without consent. Pelvic massages to induce hysterical paroxysms, vaginal douches with cold water or antiseptic, uterine examinations that are more punishment than diagnosis. Some women are forced into surgeries, hysterectomies, clitoridectomies, under the pretense of healing their minds by altering their bodies. If you flinch or cry or resist, it's taken as evidence that the procedure is necessary. Your clothing is controlled, your hair may be cut. You are scrubbed down regularly, not for your comfort, but to ensure cleanliness by someone else's standard. You're not allowed to look too proud, or too plain, or too expressive. You're expected to embody the Victorian ideal of womanhood, modest, passive, obedient. But if you appear too dull, they'll call it melancholia. Too lively, and it's hysteria. Too sensual, and you're labelled immoral. Too independent, and you're labelled insane. Your relationships with other women are watched closely. Affection is discouraged. Friendship is seen as a distraction. Anything resembling romance, especially same-sex affection, is forbidden and punished. You may be accused of deviancy or unnatural attachment, and once that accusation is written down, it stays. You're monitored for signs of impure tendencies and isolated if they think you've formed too strong a bond. You learn to withhold affection, even when it might be the only thing keeping you sane. If you're a mother, your children are taken from you. If you're a wife, your husband's signature is all it took to put you here. And if you were neither, your fate was often decided by a brother, a father, or a male doctor who believed he knew what was best. The legal system assumes you're incapable of managing your own affairs. Once you're committed, your words carry no weight. You can protest, you can write letters, but no one is obligated to believe you, and most won't. Life in the female ward comes with its own rules. You're expected to sew, to clean, to act as though you're part of a respectable household rather than a prison. The chores are framed as therapy, but the reality is closer to forced domesticity. You fold linens, mend uniforms, wash endless piles of soiled sheets. If you complain, you're labelled difficult. If you refuse, you're restrained. You are being remade into something smaller, quieter, more acceptable. Violence is not always loud here. It's not just slaps or restraints or sudden punishments. It's the quiet erosion of your identity. The way your opinions are rewritten as symptoms. The way your trauma is ignored unless it fits a narrative that absolves the people who hurt you. You may have come here after being abused, after suffering loss, after surviving things no one should have to endure. But none of that matters. In the eyes of the asylum, your suffering is not a story. It's a defect. The staff treat you differently too. Some are paternalistic, others dismissive. Many are invasive. Male doctors perform exams without warning. Male attendants oversee bathing. You're told it's clinical, that you're overreacting, that it's for your own safety. But you feel the power imbalance every time someone enters your space without knocking. You feel it when they talk about your body, like it doesn't belong to you. When they ask questions that are clearly judgments in disguise. Even your improvement is gendered. If you want to be considered for release, you must perform femininity to their satisfaction. Speak softly. Avoid direct eye contact. Agree with whatever is said to you. Express gratitude even when you're humiliated. Learn to smile at the right time. Be passive, pliable, apologetic. The goal is not to become well, it's to become harmless, or at least convincing enough that they think you are. And if you don't perform correctly, if you remain outspoken, if you express anger, if you continue to question the rules, you stay. For years, maybe forever. The records will say you're unfit for society, that your progress is inadequate, that your condition remains unchanged. But what they really mean is that you haven't given in. You haven't surrendered your dignity in the precise, palatable shape they requested. Men in asylums are punished for behaviour. Women are punished for existing the wrong way. You don't need to lash out to be labelled dangerous. You just need to take up space in the wrong mood. And once that label is attached to you, it follows you everywhere. Down the halls, into the therapy rooms, into your medical notes. It clings to you like the scent of disinfectant and never quite fades. Being a woman in a Victorian asylum means being trapped in a paradox. You're expected to be soft, but not fragile. Quiet, but not too quiet. Sad, but not inconvenient. And the minute you fail to strike that impossible balance, the system decides you're no longer fit to live among the sane. So it tucks you away, locks the door, and calls that progress. By now, you've probably figured out that fairness isn't part of the asylum's mission statement. But what might surprise you is just how much your experience here depends on how much money you, or someone on the outside, had before you arrived. Because while every patient wears the same blank expression and chews the same tasteless porridge, not all patients are equal. There's a sharp, deliberate line between paupers and private patients, and you learn quickly which side of it you've landed on. If you're a pauper, you already know it. You entered through the back door. You weren't brought in a carriage or met by a kindly administrator. You were processed like freight, recorded, stripped, deloused, and assigned to the pauper wing. It's colder, it's louder, the walls are stained, the beds are closer together, and the blankets are thinner. You share everything. Soap, combs, air. Privacy doesn't exist here, and no one pretends otherwise. Your ward smells like damp wool and despair, and if something breaks, it stays broken. The staff assigned to your wing are less patient, less qualified, and more likely to treat you like a problem instead of a person. They expect resistance. They assume ignorance. If you hesitate to follow an order, they don't ask questions. They tighten their grip. You are here to be contained, not consulted. Your paperwork might not even include a formal diagnosis. Sometimes, being poor is reason enough. Your treatments are chosen for cost efficiency, not efficacy. You get the cheapest drugs, the harshest labour assignments, and the oldest equipment. You are the first to be restrained and the last to be released. You do the laundry, the scrubbing, the heaviest gardening work. The asylum doesn't run without pauper labour, and the assumption is that you have nothing better to do anyway. If you get sick, sicker than you already are, they might move you to the infirmary, but only if they think you're worth the resources. Often you're not. And then there are the private patients. You see them occasionally, walking in small groups along separate paths or escorted to private rooms by staff who smile a little too much. They have cleaner linens, better food, and quieter wards. They wear different clothes, still plain but better made. If you catch their eye, some look away. Others stare like they're wondering how you slipped in from the street. And in a way, that's exactly what happened. You're not just ill here, you're poor and ill. That makes you the control group in someone else's experiment. Private patients are usually here because someone is paying a great deal to make them disappear politely. A wife who reads too many books. A son with eccentric habits. A brother who won't stop shouting about money or sin. They get doctors who listen, rooms with actual furniture, and the occasional luxury. Tea with sugar, supervised visits with family, access to reading materials. If they improve, or learn to pretend, they might be discharged with a certificate and a handshake. You'll be lucky if anyone remembers your name. Sometimes you overhear conversations. A staff member mentioning how polite a private patient is, how tragic her situation is. That word, tragic, only seems to apply when there's money involved. Your story isn't tragic, it's inconvenient, messy, disposable. No one calls a pauper's madness a tragedy. They call it inevitable, heredity, weak stock, the consequences of poor choices, poor hygiene, poor morals. There's always a reason when you don't have a wallet, and the treatments reflect this attitude. While you're being scrubbed raw in a cold bath for disobedience, the private patient across the hall might be journaling. While you're on your knees in the garden under a harsh sun, she might be painting in a room with a window that opens. You're both technically patients, you're both technically ill, but only one of you is considered worth rehabilitating. The other, you, is just meant to be managed. Even the notes in your file will sound different. Hers will describe her condition in soft clinical terms: melancholia, nervous exhaustion, delicate constitution. Yours will be blunt, hysterical, disruptive, sullen, resistant to authority. And those words stick. They're used to justify your treatment, to explain why you haven't improved, to predict your future. You are not expected to recover. You're expected to quiet down. Release, if it comes at all, is also class-based. A private patient might be discharged after a few months, declared cured, and sent back to her family with a carefully worded note and a polite lie about how well she responded to treatment. You might be here for years, forgotten, moved from ward to ward as space requires. When your bed is needed, they might send you back to the streets or to a workhouse. Not because you're well, because you're no longer their problem. And yet, in moments, you feel the illusion break. You see the private patients walking with stiff shoulders, glancing nervously over their shoulders. You hear the same notes of fear in their voices. Because the truth is, the asylum doesn't care who you are once you're inside. Not really. It cares about appearances. It cares about money. It cares about order. But once you've been labelled, the system has no incentive to treat you as anything more than a body to be processed. Still, class buys comfort. It buys dignity. It buys plausible deniability. It's the difference between being rested and being confined, between therapy and punishment, between recovery and containment. And while those differences may look small on paper, they're vast when you're living them. When you're watching someone else sip tea while you scrub her bed sheets, you may tell yourself that money wouldn't have changed your fate, that the system is broken regardless, and you'd be right. But it's easier to survive a broken system when it wraps its bars in velvet and feeds you warm soup while it locks the door. Eventually, you think about leaving. Not in a formal sense, no one talks about discharge as a realistic possibility. You've seen what happens to people who ask too often. No, this is different. This is the kind of thought that creeps in when you're staring out the barred window, watching a bird land on the edge of the roof, free to go anywhere. It's the idea that maybe, just maybe, if you found the right moment, you could slip out, disappear, reclaim whatever version of yourself still exists beyond these walls. You wouldn't be the first to try. And, As you'll soon learn, you won't be the first to fail. The building is not designed for freedom. From the outside, it might resemble a school or a country estate, but on the inside, it's all locks, bolts, and layers of quiet control. Doors don't just close, they lock automatically. Keys are worn like jewellery by staff who never forget to jingle them. A sound as constant as breathing. Windows are high, narrow, and often barred. Even if you could reach one, even if you managed to break the glass without alerting someone, you'd still have to fit through a space not much wider than your arm. It's not impossible exactly, just highly improbable. You consider the hallways. They're long, straight, endless, but you know now they only lead to more locked doors. You've memorised the timing of the patrols, the shifts of the attendants, the routines of the staff. You've counted the seconds between when the night watch passes your door and when he circles back. You think maybe there's a window, a gap in the system, a small error in a large, arrogant machine. But even as you plot, you know the truth. The machine may be arrogant, but it's not sloppy. Sometimes someone tries anyway. You hear about it in whispers. Someone who bolted during outdoor time. Someone who slipped out of the workroom when no one was looking. A patient who climbed a fence, sprinted across the lawn, made it all the way to the woods. The staff say these things like warnings, like cautionary tales, but you hear something else in those stories, the smallest flicker of hope, until they get to the end. Because the end is always the same. They're caught, every time. Sometimes quickly, before they've even left the building. Sometimes after hours of searching, when they're finally found hiding in the stables or crouched behind a hedge, barefoot and panting. Occasionally, one makes it as far as the road, but never farther. They're always brought back, and when they are, they don't come back whole. They come back strapped to a stretcher, drugged, bleeding, silent. Punishment for escape attempts is swift, brutal, and unrecorded. The lucky ones get confined to isolation for a week or two. Bread, water, darkness, silence. The less lucky ones get restraints, ice baths, a sudden adjustment to their medication, a new note in their file, danger to self and others. That's all it takes to erase any chance of release. From that moment on, every complaint you make, every twitch you have, is filtered through the lens of your instability. The desire for freedom becomes a symptom, the proof of your madness, because in this place, wanting to leave is considered irrational. And the staff are always watching, always listening. They don't trust you, and they certainly don't trust each other. If you so much as linger too long near an unlocked door, someone will take notice, ask questions, move you to a different ward. You think you're being clever, subtle, but the system has seen it all before. A century of escape attempts has taught the building how to close its arms tighter. Even if you had help, it wouldn't be enough. There's no one on the outside willing to stage a rescue. Your family either believes you belong here or has moved on. Your friends, if you had any left, have been told you're being treated safely and humanely. No one suspects that your letters are censored, that your voice has been flattened into medical jargon and filed away. You are not a person with a life and a history. You are a patient number in a long hallway, and patients don't escape. They relapse. Eventually you stop trying to find exits. You stop checking the hinges on windows or testing the softness of the garden soil beneath your feet. You stop replaying the idea of stealing a key, of slipping into the back of a delivery cart, of walking until someone mistakes you for someone worth saving. The thoughts don't leave entirely. They just lose their sharpness. They become dull little ghosts that follow you quietly, but no longer speak. But the knowledge remains, that at least one person tried. That maybe, for a brief moment, they saw the sky without a roof over it. That their lungs filled with unfiltered air. You envy that moment more than you fear what came after. Because even if they failed, they remembered, if only for a second, what it felt like to want something again. You wonder what the staff think when they catch someone running. Do they feel triumphant, annoyed, pitying? Do they see a person desperate for freedom, or just another disruption to paperwork and routine? Maybe they don't think at all. Maybe they've trained themselves not to. Maybe that's how they sleep at night. By convincing themselves that anyone who tries to escape clearly belongs here. The most terrifying part is that you start to believe it too. Not all at once, but little by little. You tell yourself there's no point in running, that it wouldn't work, that you'd just be caught, that maybe you don't deserve to leave, that maybe you're not ready. These aren't your thoughts. You know that, but you think them anyway. Because it's easier to convince yourself you chose to stay than to face the truth that you're trapped and always were. So no, you don't escape. You survive. You wait. You nod when spoken to. You walk the same halls, eat the same meals, pretend to smile when someone asks how you're feeling. And every so often, when the wind catches a loose shutter, or a bird lands outside your window, or you hear the faintest hint of music from somewhere too far away, you allow yourself the tiniest flicker of a thought. Not yet, but maybe. One day, you probably assumed that being confined to an asylum would mean rest. After all, wasn't that the justification? That you needed peace and quiet, time to heal, a place to recover from whatever breakdown or breach of social decorum landed you here. What you didn't realise is that the moment you walked through those doors, you stopped being just a patient. You became a resource, part of the engine that keeps the asylum running. Your treatment, it turns out, is also your job. No one calls it work. They call it therapeutic activity or moral occupation. They say it builds structure, fosters routine, improves mental health. But the truth is simpler. The asylum has endless tasks and a very limited budget, and someone needs to keep the place running. That someone is you, and every other patient who's physically able to move a mop, carry a coal bucket, or operate a mangle. Laundry is one of the largest operations. Hundreds of sheets, blankets, uniforms, and towels pass through each week, and none of it washes itself. You're assigned a shift without being asked. The laundry room is hot, damp, and endlessly loud. Steam hisses from pipes overhead, and the clang of metal tubs echoes off the stone walls. You sort piles of soiled linens by hand, scrub stains from cloth that has long since given up the fight, and feed fabric through enormous rollers designed more for punishment than practicality. The air smells like old soap, sweat, and mildew. If you're lucky, the water is only lukewarm. If you're not, it's cold and already grey with yesterday's effort. No one pays you. Of course not. You're not a worker. You're a patient, and patients don't need wages. What you get instead is a nod, or a muttered, "well done," or, if someone's feeling generous, an extra crust of bread. Occasionally your name might be noted for good behaviour, but your labour, no matter how hard, doesn't shorten your stay. It doesn't bring you closer to release. It just ensures that the blankets stay clean and the administrators stay pleased. If you're not assigned to laundry, you'll be sent elsewhere. Some patients sweep the floors, others haul coal, carry water, or work in the kitchens. The stronger men are given shovels and rakes and turned out into the gardens. You weed, dig, plant, and harvest vegetables you'll never get to eat. You may be told this is healing, that it reconnects you with the earth. But what it really does is feed the asylum without draining the budget. You are not reconnecting with nature. You are subsidising your own imprisonment. The labour is divided loosely by gender and perceived ability. Women are sent to the sewing rooms, hunched over mending tables, repairing uniforms, and hospital gowns, under the watchful eye of someone with a whistle and very little patience. They mend until their fingers bleed, until their eyes blur. If the stitching isn't neat enough, the garment is thrown back in their lap without a word. If it happens too often, they're assigned to floor scrubbing instead, knees to stone, bucket to hand. Men are more likely to be given hard labour, lifting, hauling, repairing broken furniture, tending to livestock if the asylum is large and rural enough to keep animals. You build fences, fix sheds. Sometimes you even build additional asylum wings, brick by brick. Yes, they actually make patients construct the very walls that will hold more patients in the future. There's something poetic about that. If your definition of poetry includes a deep undercurrent of cruelty, there's a hierarchy among workers, though no one officially acknowledges it. The strongest, most compliant patients get the most demanding jobs. They're trusted to move freely around the grounds, within limits. They're often given slightly better meals, slightly warmer coats, slightly more attention. At first you might envy them. Then you notice how they walk, the limp that doesn't heal, the way their eyes glaze over when given a new assignment. They're not free, they're just broken in. Labour isn't only physical. Some patients are tasked with clerical work, copying notes, sorting files, keeping track of inventory. These are the ones who are educated before arriving, who can still hold a pen steady and spell their own name. This is considered a privilege, but it's still unpaid. It's still service. You're still working for the institution that locked you up, hoping that diligence will someday count for something. It usually doesn't. All of this labour is framed as kindness. You're not being exploited. You're being engaged, helping with your own upkeep, participating in your recovery. Never mind that you didn't volunteer, that you're not allowed to decline, that any sign of resistance is interpreted as a symptom. If you refuse to work, you're not expressing agency. You're non-compliant. If you complain about pain, fatigue, or dizziness, you're malingering. And if you stop speaking entirely, they call that catatonia and double your dosage. What's worse is that people on the outside applaud it. Donors visit and see the neat gardens, the orderly sewing rooms, the patients bent calmly over their tasks, and they leave feeling good about their generosity. Look how industrious the inmates are, they say. How productive, how useful. No one asks whether you're tired, whether you volunteered, whether you've done this same task every day for 2 years and haven't once been thanked. Sometimes you hear staff joke that if it weren't for the patients, the asylum would fall apart. They're not wrong. The system depends on your labour. You are the janitor, the gardener, the laundress, the carpenter, the maid, the cook's assistant. Without you, the asylum would drown in its own waste and starve on its own inefficiency. But it never gives you credit. It just gives you more work. You might think that working harder would improve your chances of release. It won't. At best, it might earn you fewer punishments, a gentler tone from an orderly, an extra blanket during the winter, but the ledger doesn't care how many sheets you washed. It only tracks whether you smiled at the right time, said the right things, learned to accept the routine without complaint. So you keep working. You lift, scrub, stitch and rake. You do it because it's required. Because refusing will only land you somewhere worse. And because deep down, you hope that if you just prove yourself useful enough, long enough, someone might finally decide you're sane. But that's not how it works. In the asylum, usefulness is never a ticket out. It's just another way to keep you in. They call it progress, a new treatment, a breakthrough, a modern approach. The doctors talk about it with pride, sometimes even excitement, as if you should be honoured to be on the receiving end of their latest experiment. But after everything you've already endured, the restraints, the leeches, the endless enemas, you've learned to be sceptical of anything they call advanced. Because here, treatment doesn't evolve to become more humane. It evolves to become more efficient at silencing you. Take the ice bath, for example. It's been around for decades, but now it's being used more systematically. Not as punishment, officially, but as therapy. You're submerged without warning into a tube of water, so cold it stuns your body into stillness. Your limbs seize. Your breath catches. You try to scream, but your lungs tighten too quickly. The staff call it calming. They say it reduces agitation. regulates circulation, and clears the mind. What it really does is shock you into submission. After a few sessions, you stop raising your voice. Not because you feel better, because you're afraid of the water. If you're not responding to the ice, they might suggest the next big thing, something more scientific. Enter electrotherapy. A device is wheeled in, humming softly, wires coiled like snakes. You're told it will stimulate your nerves, that it will correct whatever imbalance caused your distress. They attach electrodes to your scalp, or your temples, or the back of your neck. The current is low, they say, just a tingle. But sometimes it jumps, sometimes it burns. And if you flinch or cry or pull away, they write it down as resistance, not fear. The side effects are minor: headaches, nausea, memory lapses, occasional seizures. You learn quickly to sit still and pretend it's working. Then there's the hydrotherapy bed, a long, padded coffin of sorts, where you're wrapped tightly in wet sheets, soaked in cold or warm water, depending on the desired effect. If you're agitated, cold to quiet you down. If you're depressed, warm to stimulate. Once wrapped, you're left there, restrained, sometimes for hours, sometimes longer. You can't move, you can barely breathe. The staff say it's for your benefit. That being swaddled like an infant is therapeutic, but you know what it really is. Another way to keep you still, mute, and forgettable. And then comes insulin shock therapy, the cutting edge of psychiatric medicine, or so they claim. A series of carefully controlled insulin injections administered until your blood sugar drops so low that your body seizes and your consciousness flickers out. The doctors induce a coma on purpose, then bring you back with glucose once you've been reset. It's marketed as revolutionary. Patients in catatonic states are sometimes said to speak after treatment. The doctors see this as success, but you know better. You've seen the aftermath, the trembling hands, the glassy eyes, the vomiting, the days of confusion. You've seen people forget their names, their families, their sense of time. No one asks them how they feel. The fact that they're quiet afterward is considered proof it worked. These procedures are rarely explained. You're not consulted, you're informed, if that. Most of the time, someone just arrives and says it's time for your session. You ask what it's for, and the answer is vague. Nerves, behaviour, symptoms. Whatever word sounds clinical enough to silence your fear. And if you refuse, they hold you down, inject you anyway. Sometimes they sedate you first so you won't remember. The paperwork will say, consented under supervision. There are newer ideas too. Bleeding is out of fashion mostly, but they still dabble in surgical solutions. A tooth extraction perhaps to relieve pressure, or cauterizing parts of the nasal cavity to reduce overstimulation. More experimental doctors are beginning to talk about brain surgery. Nothing widespread yet, but the whispers are there, opening the skull to see the pathways, to fix emotions at the source. You hear the words and feel your stomach turn. You realise that in a place like this, being on the cutting edge of science usually means being the one they cut open first. And yet, they still call it treatment. They document it in files, present it at conferences, publish papers filled with graphs and Latin terminology. They're proud of their work. They don't see you. They see results, quieter patients, fewer outbursts, blank stares that resemble serenity if you squint hard enough. No one measures how much of yourself disappears each time they wheel you back from another session. You hear them talk in the hallway sometimes, comparing notes, discussing patients like puzzles. Responded well to insulin, may benefit from prolonged isolation. Still emotionally labile. Your name comes up occasionally, not as a person, as a case, as something to be handled. You start to understand that progress here doesn't mean healing. It means erasure, smoothing the rough edges until nothing sticks out, until no one asks questions, until you're just another quiet figure in a long hallway, full of quiet figures. Some patients come to believe in the treatments, or at least pretend to. They say the baths help. They say the electricity clears their thoughts. They parrot the staff's words in the hope that it will buy them peace. Sometimes it works. Sometimes the staff take that as a sign you're improving and reduce your sessions. Sometimes they say it's proof you need more. You learn quickly that logic doesn't apply here. The system doesn't care what's true. It cares what's manageable. And you begin to change, slowly. You forget things. You flinch when anyone enters the room. You speak less not because you have nothing to say, but because the cost of speaking is too high. You no longer react to cold water or the sting of a needle with anything more than a sigh. You stop asking why. That's not recovery, that's surrender. But the doctors smile and write, patient, calm and cooperative in your file, and the system congratulates itself on another success. Eventually, you realise the most dangerous place in the asylum isn't the restraint room, or the bath chamber, or even the shock ward. It's the treatment room, the one with clean floors, white coats, and quiet humming machines. Because in that room, they take away pieces of you, one by one, and call it medicine. And you let them, because the alternative is worse. So when they come for you again, with another needle, or another promise of peace, you don't resist. You walk, you sit, you nod. And as the world blurs for the 10th, 20th, 50th time, you try to remember what it felt like to be whole before they called it healing and turned it into a procedure. You don't notice it all at once. The fading happens slowly, like a room dimming one gaslight at a time. At first, it's just the little things, forgetting what day it is, what season it might be, whether you've already eaten breakfast or are still waiting for someone to unlock the dining hall door. These things seem harmless, understandable. The days blur together here. Time doesn't move like it used to. You assume your mind is simply adjusting to the routine. But really, it's shrinking to fit the shape of the cage it's been given. You begin to forget how long you've been here. You try to count the weeks, the months, but the numbers slip away. Was it last winter that you arrived, or the one before? You remember cold mornings, sure. But which ones? You remember frost on the windows, a cracked bowl of porridge, someone screaming 2 cells down. But that could have been yesterday. It could have been a year ago. You stop trying to measure time. It doesn't behave anymore. Soon, you start to lose the details. Not the big ones at first, just the background colour of things. The name of the street where you grew up. The scent of your old apartment. The voice of a friend you haven't seen since they dropped you off at the gate. These memories come less frequently. When they do, they feel like dreams. Distorted, hazy, out of reach. You chase them for a moment, then let them go. You tell yourself it's normal. That forgetting is easier than remembering something you can never have again. And then the edges of yourself begin to blur. You find it harder to recall how old you are, whether you ever had children, whether you ever married. Your face in the mirror, when there is a mirror, looks unfamiliar. Not because it's changed, though it has, but because you've stopped thinking of it as yours. You don't recognise the hollowness in the eyes, the slump in the shoulders, the way your mouth holds itself, like it's waiting to be told what to say. One day, someone calls your name, and it takes a second longer than it should for you to respond. Not because you didn't hear it, but because you weren't sure it belonged to you. You hear the syllables and they sound strange, like a character you once played in a story that ended long ago. You say the name out loud later that night, just to test it, just to see if it still fits. It doesn't. It feels like a label, not an identity, a word scribbled on a file folder. The staff still refer to you by name, or at least by the name in their ledger, but it's always said like a command. Patient Williams, Miss Carter, number 34. You don't hear warmth in it anymore, just formality. A reminder that you're a chart to be updated, a bed to be filled, a problem to be managed. You start to respond more to tone than to words. A sharp voice means hurry. A flat voice means sit. A hand on your shoulder means move. You stop needing language to navigate the world. Instinct is faster. Your memories become a collection of fragments, a train whistle, the colour of your mother's dress, the smell of a bakery, a joke someone once told you that made you laugh so hard you dropped a cup. But you don't remember who told it, or why it was funny, or whether it really happened. You start to wonder how many of your memories are real, and how many were invented just to give yourself something to hold on to. And that's when you realise how far you've drifted. The other patients blur too. You still recognise faces, routines, voices, but not names. You've stopped asking. You nod to the man who walks in circles and hums to himself. You make room on the bench for the woman who never speaks above a whisper. You share glances, hand over scraps of bread, pass notes in silence, but you no longer ask who they are. You no longer offer who you are. It doesn't seem necessary. You are all part of the same slow erosion. The doctors say you're stable now. You've stopped acting out. You're compliant, cooperative, a model patient. They consider this improvement, but you know better. You haven't improved, you've disappeared. You don't get angry anymore, because you don't feel much of anything. You don't cry because you're not sure what to cry about. You've become quiet, empty, manageable, and they take that as a sign of healing. The worst part is that you're starting to agree. You start thinking of your own silence as strength, your own numbness as maturity. You start to believe that maybe this is how people are supposed to be, that maybe you were broken before, that the parts of yourself that used to scream and laugh and argue were symptoms, not signs of life. You forget that you once had opinions. You forget what it felt like to be defiant. Eventually, the mirror doesn't matter. The name doesn't matter. The memories stop coming at all. You wake up, you eat, you walk the halls, you sit when told. The days loop like a lullaby with too many verses. You know where you're supposed to be at any given time. You don't question, you don't wonder. And if someone asked you to explain who you are, really explain it, you wouldn't have an answer. You're not sure when it happens exactly, but one day you realise that you haven't thought about the outside world in a very long time. Not about friends, not about family, not about who you used to be. It's not painful, it's just gone. Like a book someone closed and shelved in a room you'll never find again. You live now in the present tense only. Not because you've mastered mindfulness, but because the past has quietly excused itself and the future has been locked behind a door you're not allowed to touch. And so you fade, not all at once, not dramatically, just little by little, until what's left is someone who sits when told, nods when asked, and no longer remembers what it means to be free. Someone who may still answer to a name, but no longer feels like a person who owns it. You didn't lose your mind here. You handed it over, piece by piece, in exchange for peace, for silence, for safety. And the scariest part is how gentle it all felt, like falling asleep with your eyes open. So this is what healing looks like in the Victorian Asylum. Not recovery, not understanding, not even peace, just stillness. You don't scream anymore, you don't fight. You've learned how to nod, how to sit, how to fold your hands in your lap, and say thank you when someone places a tray in front of you. The staff call this progress. They smile at how calm you are now, how well you've responded to treatment. What they don't say is that the version of you they wanted has replaced the one who arrived. And that old version has been buried under layers of silence and routine. You're not cured, you're quiet. And in here, that's enough. The institution doesn't measure your health in joy or clarity. It measures compliance, obedience, a predictable rhythm. You're no longer unpredictable, and so you're considered well. The fact that your spirit has been scraped down to the bone doesn't concern anyone. You're not a danger to yourself or others anymore. Not because something inside you has healed, but because you've stopped reaching for anything. You've stopped hoping, And without hope, there's nothing left to resist. Maybe one day, you'll be discharged. Released back into a world that barely remembers you. They'll hand you clothes that don't fit, and a note that says, recovered, and you'll walk out slowly, blinking against the sun. But even if your body leaves this place, the asylum stays, in your habits, in your silence, in the way you flinch at keys, avoid questions, and never let your voice rise above a whisper. They may have stopped locking the door, but they trained you not to try it anyway. And if you never leave, if you stay within these walls until the last part of you fades, well, no one will notice the difference. You'll be remembered as cooperative, as manageable, as someone who adjusted well to institutional life. And in the end, that's all the asylum ever wanted from you. Not healing, not happiness, just the absence of trouble.